So FinTech comes in so many different sizes and shapes and different kinds of services and different kinds of ways. One of the key things that folks need to understand who are FinTech companies or finance related companies that are emailing out is that from an email deliverability standpoint, there are a lot of financial crimes and frauds that start with email. So they have to make sure that they're not accidentally looking like the kinds of emails that are involved in scams. If you think about the sort of most classic email scam that's been around, the Nigerian prince scam, what it essentially is usually some sort of lending scam. So if you're in the lending space, you just have to be hyper sensitive to the fact that emails that are about lending money or doing something with loans are looked at pretty dubiously by receiving email servers. So you have to make sure that the way you're framing these things, these emails, is not stacking spam keywords on top of another. If it's about lending, it can be about lending. But if you start to incorporate things like the word free or dollar signs and things like that, you can create an environment where spam filters are going to be filtering them out pretty aggressively. On top of that, a lot of fintech companies are not personal finance. They're not necessarily lending, but they're reaching out to financial institutions because they're a piece of financial infrastructure in some way. And financial institutions tend to have higher security for their email systems, meaning they are sorting emails more aggressively and trying to not let emails that could have a problem get through their systems. So that means that a further level of diligence needs to be done. And typically what diligence means in these categories is obviously SPF, DMARC, DKIM, perfectly aligned. The domain you're sending from goes directly to the website of your company and enterprise. The email text itself, not drawing attention to itself in a negative way, having any obvious spam keywords, no attachments, no links that have redirects in them. There's a lot of information on our website and elsewhere that talks about ways to not accidentally look like you're a scammer, spoofer, or scammer. And so all those things need to be taken very seriously. Furthermore, finance people, depending on what part of the finance industry you're emailing into, they may be receiving a lot of emails or a little bit of emails. Either way, finance people have a reputation for reading all the emails that they get or many of the emails they get. It's not typically the kind of industry player that lets emails stack up and they never check them or something. So it means that if the email does get delivered, you're probably going to get a shot for them to view it. It doesn't mean that it'll be registered as an open, because being registered as an open requires pixels or images to be loaded, and a lot of financial institutions don't allow images to load because images can contain malware, other things. So you might not see it as an open, but it's very likely that a lot of people in the finance industry are actually opening the majority of emails they get through to them. So they're looking at this email right off the bat. From the outside, job title wise, sometimes, especially these larger organizations, it's almost impossible to know what that person is actually doing inside the company. So it means that your email text should be more humble and acknowledge the fact that the person you're reaching might not be the right person, but might be the general zone of interest. So you might frame this in such a way where you're not trying to say, I bet you're having this problem. You sort of have to soften it, say, perhaps folks in your group or in your department or in your in your general area of your company are having this set of problems, and I'd like to show it to you or talk it through or something. So it tends to help to soften the value proposition, soften the targeting a little bit, so as to try to get the highest likelihood of them receiving your email and taking it seriously. Also in finance and fintech, your credibility as a sender is very, very important. as we all know in finance, very large transactions are done between parties quite frequently or very frequently. And those are almost always based on trust. It's actually very rare these days that someone meets face to face to sort of finish a transaction. There's all these interlocking interests that try to prove trust before the transaction happens, if that makes sense. So if you are someone credible and you have some sort of pedigree, you came from somewhere, or you're backed by someone that matters, or there's some sort of verifiable something about your existence that helps them say, oh, okay, this is someone or something, or that is not coming out of nowhere, that helps a lot. So don't be afraid to bring your credibility forward so as to make the person who receives your email think, okay, I'm kind of interested in this. And also this person seems credible. Sure, I will take interest with this. So I think that all those things really matter, which means that even if your value proposition is quite specific, whatever that value proposition is, you should always remember that you are also on display here, the sender of the email, and that you need to present a credible foot forward as well. If you've raised a reasonable amount of money, you can mention that. If you are backed by good venture capitalists, you can mention that. If you want to have a little bit of a bio of yourself and that makes the email long and soggy, feel free to put the bio of yourself below your signature. If your product or service has a wide variety of things that it can do, that's very flexible and it might fit into the organization in a variety of different ways, maybe you give the very high level of it and then you say below my signature, I'll provide more details on exactly what it does. Furthermore, a lot of these folks don't necessarily want to meet with you or see demos, possibly because they're very busy or they're not really the buyer. So they feel a little bit uncomfortable engaging in a sales relationship with the person who sent the email. In other words, if let's say you are some sort of solution for know your customer or some solution, some sort of data analytics solution or something, they might know instinctively that the process inside their organization for purchasing things like this involves a very large buying committee that they're only a very small part of. So if your ask is, can I show you a demo? Can I show you a demo? Or can I do something that requires you to be involved? Actually might turn them off in a way. It sometimes can be better to ask them what the process would be in order to move this forward. So let's say you present a pretty good value proposition. You say, can I send over a fact sheet that goes into more details on exactly how this kind of system works? They might say, okay, sure, I'll see a fact sheet or something like that. If you do actually want to ask for the meeting, then you might say, are you or other folks on your team the right people to have a look at this kind of thing? So you sort of widen it out immediately. So then they can take it back to the team and say, hey, I got an email about this. Should we do it together or whatever? If it becomes off as pestering, like you're particularly trying to get them to do something, oftentimes we see folks in finance get a little bit suspicious or they get a little bit, they don't want to act alone when they have a group or a team of people that they typically act with. This is slightly different from looser, less complicated types or less secure types of environments. For example, a marketing person or an HR person inside an org very well may just do a demo with someone on their own without consulting with anyone. And then after the fact, chat with their team and say, hey, this happened. Like, what do you think? We find that that's relatively more rare in finance and financial organization type settings. A lot of folks that come to us want to email into banks, community banks, credit unions, because there are a large number of them. And they tend to be seen as companies that need some updating. So there's more likely you'll see a solution that someone's providing that's supposed to help move a community bank or a credit union or something forward in a way. We find that community banks and credit unions are receptive to cold email. They will open emails. Inside those organizations, In some cases, we see them not embracing change very often, or them knowing how slow it takes for things to change. So very light calls to action tend to work better. Things like I mentioned before, fact sheets or things like that can also be interesting to them. We find that those types of organizations are pretty interested in learning. So if you say, I'd love to show you how other institutions are using this kind of thing and see if it might resonate with the way your team is moving, they might say, oh, sure, we like to learn, we like to share information, we like to do a lunch and learn type thing. Those can be, they can be pretty open to that kind of thing. And fundamentally, from the outside, you might have an idea of what you think their goals are as an organization, but you might actually be slightly wrong. For example, you might think that their goal is to issue more loans. Very well, that might be an ultimate goal for them, but it might, their particular KPIs might actually be a little bit more quotidian, meaning they might say, well, yes, getting loans is important, but we actually care more about overall engagement. What does that mean? Well, it means people opening our app, people reaching out to customer support if they need help, maybe even footfalls in their locations. So it's not that your solution can't help them with those things, or maybe it can, it can't, it doesn't really matter. But if you're emailing them with very high goals that are in the stratosphere, they might think, well, that's a good thing, but that's not really where my KPIs are, or where my mind is these days, or what we really talk about so much in meetings. And a lot of this might have to do with the nature of a community bank or a credit union, and that they're trying to bring their members in and keep them close and help them through very particular life milestones. So an average member might buy a house, or an average family member might buy a house once in 20 years, which means you can't really necessarily have an outbound strategy where like one alone, one alone, one alone, one alone. But they might find, for houses, that is, but they might find that they have that kind of strategy for car loans. They might say, well, in the lifetime of one of our members, an average family of 4 or 5 is buying 5 cars over the course of 20 years. So maybe we do need to be more aggressive with that. So that means that if you're going out and saying, we can help you double the number of loans you can get, what you're offering, it might be factual, like your product or service can actually help with that goal, but it might not fit with their idea of what is actually feasible based on their own knowledge of inside their organization. So that is to say that leading with numbers that are sort of interesting and compelling might actually end up turning them off, because they might say, well, that's so far outside of what we've ever seen is possible with our organization that we probably shouldn't even engage with this, because there must be something different about their target customers versus ours. So I would say a high level of empathy and a high level of trying to understand the mindset of the person you're emailing in this finance space will probably serve you better than in other categories, if that makes sense. That's a bunch of sort of random ideas around what we've seen in emailing finance and fintech. There's a lot of different kinds of fintech. There's a lot of different kinds of sales targets for this kind of thing, all the way from emailing people who run hedge funds down to community banks and credit unions. Senders has done a lot of those emails across a very wide swath of fintech, finance, fintech, various kinds of things in that category. And we're happy to answer more questions, dig into details on specifics, run through specific ideas that relate to what you're doing, look at any email deliverability issues that you're finding in your own cold emailing currently, or helping you get started with them. Please reach out and we can chat about it.